What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach Kevin Smith as we break down Super Bowl 59. It was a wild one, Coach. What's going on?
It was a wild one indeed, and wild not necessarily because the game was outrageous, but just the way it unfolded. A few people saw that coming. I mean, my goodness, man! At one point, the score was 40-6.
Yeah.
The Eagles were putting in the JV. That was
Yep.
stunning, absolutely stunning.
I mean, when you're hearing Tom Brady on the call talk about Xavier Worthy's fourth quarter touchdown saying, yeah, he got over the top of those reserve players. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They are benching starters in the Super Bowl. Kenny Pickett took the last snap of Super Bowl 59. Like, it's just. Anyways, let's start off there. What was your reaction to the Super Bowl? I know you were surrounded by Eagles fans.
Yeah, I threw a party like we do every year, and it's most of the people. This is Philly country, so probably 25 or so Eagles fans in the house. They were surprisingly subdued, and part of it is because we're old. I mean, nobody was shotgunning beers on the porch and taking off their shirt and doing EAGLES chants. But it was I think early on, it was encouraging, but they were cautious because this is Patrick Mahomes. These are the Chiefs. A couple of years ago, the Eagles had a 10-point lead at halftime, and you're always wary. But there was a sequence in the middle of the second quarter. Philly's leading 10-0. They punt the ball back to Kansas City, and the Kansas City drive goes like this: sack, pick six.
Yeah.
And one of those sacks, the second one, came against a four-man rush from the Eagles, and Kansas City had 7 in protection. So it was 4 against 7, and they just bulldozed Kansas City's blockers into Mahomes. And it was like, oh my God, Philly is assaulting them up front. And I think that's the moment where I was like, the Eagles are going to win this thing. Because when you're just getting beaten up front, as a coach, that's a helpless feeling. You just don't feel like you can do anything. And that was really sort of the moment I thought that game was over.
I thought that made it 17-0. And it's Patrick Mahomes. They can still come back. There was a lot of time left, a lot of game left. It was the Zach Bond interception that did it for me. When he threw that pick, which was set him up in the red zone, I said, this one's done. If they score here, it's over. And it was like 2 plays later, they punch it in. I don't know if that was the A.J. Brown touchdown or which score it was. There were so many from the Eagles standpoint. I was like, I can't believe this, but this game's over. Like, I don't think they can come back. But the reaction that I had, and it didn't start off well, but Coach, I said this on this show. I've said it on other shows as well. What did I want from the Super Bowl was a storyline that did not involve the officiating. And that was the case because it was a freaking blowout. And so it didn't matter. But early in the game, A.J. Brown with that big 4th down conversion, and they call offensive pass interference. And here we go. They're interjecting themselves, but then they kind of give it right back. There was a questionable defenseless player hit, and that was it Goddard that got hit on that play that they called?
Yep. Chiefs got corner launched himself there.
Right.
But, they always say, man, they always say if you're gonna beat the champ, you can't let it go to the scorecards. You got to knock them out. They
did that. They did that. I'm happy that in this show, I don't have to talk about a conspiracy theory with the officials, that the officials hose this team or that team. They completely blew the doors off of the Chiefs. And the way they did it, though, they blitzed 0 times.
0.
The Eagles did not blitz the quarterback once. And I thought, let me get your take on this. And if we touch on this later, I'm sure we might. Spagnuolo, when he dialed up pressure on Jalen Hurts, it caused him to have some issues, and I just didn't feel like he did it enough. You agree or disagree?
I agree. I think Spagnuolo was so heavily locked in on taking away Saquon Barkley, which he did wonderfully.
Yep.
And, I mean, they tackled great. They had an extra guy in the box most of the night. Barkley had 50-something rushing yards on 25 carries. I mean, they took him away. But Jalen Hurts made so many good decisions. He had the one turnover on a play where he kind of got hit and that ball winds up short. But other than that, he made so many good decisions. And there were times, where he struggled a little bit against the blitz, but there were also times where they brought the blitz and he found a little seam and he got up in there and he escaped. And I think that there was a hesitancy on Spagnuolo's part at times to commit to that because they were wary of either Hurts getting out and going or the deep ball to A.J. Brown.
This was, I still like, you put it on your Twitter account because you had our buddy Pez from Pez's Picks on, and Ken Wisniewski, the CEO of Fans First Sports Network. And Pez had said for 2 weeks now that he thought this line was way off. It was Chiefs giving 1.5. He's screaming from the mountaintops, take the Eagles getting the points, take them on the money line. This should be Eagles giving, he even said at one point, over a touchdown. He called it. He saw something that no one else did. He calls it his algorithm. I think it was just him being a homer, but still, what's your take on this? I mean, how this game unfolded?
One day scientists are going to crack that Pez's algorithm, man. I'll tell you what, that's some high level stuff. But no, I think like to Pez's credit, the one thing that he kept saying to me was look at point differentials. The Eagles have one of the best point differentials in the NFL, and they were like 16-2 or something like that against the spread. And the Chiefs actually had a losing record against the spread and a really, really minimal point differential, which meant that Kansas City was living dangerously. And, you were saying that all year long, right? Can they keep winning like this? Well, you can until you get up against a team that is better than you. Philly was the better team. So to win, if you're going to win close games against a team that's better than you, you have to play perfect, and they've got to not bring their A game. And neither one of those things happened. Philly brought their A game, and Kansas City didn't play perfect, and that equates to a blowout.
Yeah, I was thinking about this last night before I went to bed. I was like, man, the Eagles picked a hell of a time to play one of their best games of the year, and the Chiefs picked a hell of a time to play one of their worst. And that's exactly what it looked like when you looked at it. But let's go through our topics as we're going to continue to break down these two teams. The Eagles beat Washington in the NFC Championship game by 32 points. And they were leading the Chiefs at one point, like you said earlier, 40-6 in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl before they put in their backups. How dominating was this title run by Philadelphia, and where do you rank them amongst recent Super Bowl champions? And let's not forget, they only lost one game since their bye week, and that was when in Washington, Kenny Pickett came in for an injured Jalen Hurts, and that's when they lost the game. Other than that, they lost one game. Like, this is incredible. People aren't giving this team the credit they deserve. What's your take on where they rank amongst recent Super Bowl champs?
Right. Yeah. So you get that phenomenal regular season run. Mm-hmm. And then I sent you this question. You and I, we'll text ideas for the show. It was 1:00 in the morning. I was cleaning up my house from a party. I sent you this question, but then I really started to think about it. And then, I actually made this the topic for my Call Sheet podcast on Monday. I went back and I looked at the last 25 years, all the postseason runs that the Super Bowl winners have had. Philly, over the last 25 years, has the second largest average margin of victory in the postseason. They won their 4 postseason games by an average of 17 points per game. Only the 2002 Tampa Bay Bucks were better. So they passed the eye test because they looked dominating.
Yeah.
And then they passed sort of the metrics test because the numbers kind of back it up. And let's face it, man, those numbers should be bigger because the Chiefs score 16 points kind of in garbage time on Sunday night. Long story short, this is among the best postseason runs that we've seen this century.
And I just don't know why you can lump me into this category of people that never really gave the Eagles the credit they probably deserved. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm around Eagle fans who talk about wanting to fire Nick Sirianni, even when they were winning and even when they were doing well and they're finding ways to win. They just never seemed happy. So maybe I'm thinking maybe this is all kind of smoke and mirrors. But when you look at it in hindsight, you see, wow, this was one hell of a run. And I think they were the best team in the NFL. We'll talk about how we kind of reflect back on the 2024 season. And I'll touch on some other teams that maybe would be there. I think amongst recent Super Bowl champions, you got to have them at the top or near the top for sure.
Yeah. But, they collapsed down the stretch last year. Then they kind of stumble out of the gates this year.
Yep.
The Eagles fans are legitimately calling for Sirianni to be fired. And they sort of start to heat back up. But by the time that they're heating back up, everybody's paying attention to the Lions.
Yep.
The Lions or the Vikings, those they were dominating the stories, and you just sort of Philly kind of got up on you late a little bit.
Yeah. No, so I titled this podcast The Beginning and the End of a Dynasty with a question mark at the end. So are the Eagles putting themselves in a position to maybe run it back next year? Listen to the free agents, the notable free agents they have this upcoming offseason. They've got Zach Bond. We'll be talking about him a little bit later in the show. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Brandon Graham, Mekhi Becton, Fred Johnson, Avonte Maddox, their long snapper, who cares? Kenneth Gainwell, backup running back, Oren Burks, CJ Uzoma, Jack Driscoll, Nick Gates, and LaRaven Clark. I remember LaRaven Clark. He had a cup of coffee in Pittsburgh once. Yeah. So what do you think about the Eagles moving forward? I mean, there were not a lot of big names. Zach Bond was the biggest name on that because he played a phenomenal inside linebacker for them this season. You think the Eagles are ready to run it back in terms of the team and the players that are going to be coming back in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, Bond is going to get big dollars somewhere. He played on a 1-year prove it deal, and he proved it. Josh Sweat had a hell of a season for them, especially a late postseason run. He was dominant in that Super Bowl. He could have been the MVP. But, I don't know. I think Philly wants to bring him back. I think that they'll try to work something out with him to bring him back. The other guys are, you hate to use the word expendable, but those are guys that you're going to replace with a similar talent. And Philly is so good at identifying players to fit the system that they want. You think about it, we know what they do on offense, man. They want to run the ball with Saquon Barkley behind arguably the best line in the NFL. But they've got these elite receivers on the outside that make it almost impossible for you to do what the Chiefs did last night without paying for it elsewhere. And then on defense, they got Vic Fangio, who runs this very specific system. And, you think to yourself, it's just zone coverage. We can pick this apart. You can't, because they identify the right guys to play it so effectively, and then the dudes up front to make you uncomfortable as a quarterback. So it just feels like with this coaching staff in place and their ability to identify talent and plug it into their scheme, that they're going to stick around for a while.
Oh, and by the way, two of their key playmakers in the defensive secondary were rookies this year.
Rookies.
Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who had a pick six that you mentioned. So, yeah, I think they're going to be back. They're not going anywhere barring injury. So let's go on to the Chiefs, because I think this story is equally as much about the Chiefs as it is the Eagles and how poorly they played. And the question is Kansas City's title run over, or do you see them as contenders next season? Let me read off to you the list of Chiefs free agents, because I think this is important as we talk about where they go from here. So guard Trey Smith, who's going to be one of the hottest, that's going to be a big name in free agency in terms of money. He's a very good player. Nick Bolton, inside linebacker, phenomenal player. Justin Reed, he's made great plays for them throughout the season at safety. Hollywood Brown at wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver. Charles Amenahu, Tershawn Wharton, that's a defensive lineman. Kareem Hunt, the running back. Wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. Wide receiver Justin Watson. Wide receiver Mecole Hardman. Offensive tackle DJ Humphries. Defensive tackle Mike Pennell. Running back Samaje Perine. Defensive lineman Josh, I think it's Uche. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Defensive lineman Derek Nadi, and then their long snapper and Carson Wentz. So, Coach, unlike the Eagles, there's some notable names there of players that what are they going to do? And so there's some people wondering if Travis Kelce might just retire as well. And that's going to be a big impact for them as well. But what do you think about the Chiefs in terms of, is this the end of their dynasty, or are they going to find a way to retool and be fine?
I mean, you never say never with a guy like Mahomes. He's still, what's Mahomes, 28? He's not old.
He's not 30. He's not even 30.
No, he's not 30. Losing Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce looked beat up last night, didn't he? He looked like a guy who was worn down. I don't know. He just didn't seem like the same guy. Even early on, the Chiefs kind of had a look about him, like, I don't know. And let's be honest, man. I'm not trying to bring Taylor Swift and all that garbage into this conversation. But if you think about the life Travis Kelce's been living for the last 2 years, that's an exhausting pace.
Yep.
You know, that dude's got to be tired and beat up, and he's on the other side of 30 now. And yeah, you wonder, man, does he have anything more in the tank? And at what point does the rest of the league catch up to the Chiefs? I mean, like we mentioned earlier, they had a losing record against the spread this year. And that tells you, obviously, that while they were winning games, they were living dangerously in doing it. And when you get a little older in the tooth, when you lose some key free agents, when the league starts to get a little bit of a better feel for what you're doing, you can slip out of that elite pretty quickly. So I'm not saying, as long as you got Patrick Mahomes, you got a shot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if Mahomes can't be magic for them, they're going to struggle. They're going to take a step back.
And you think about, okay, so let's look at the reverse of everything we said about the Eagles defense, and especially the fact that they didn't blitz and yet they beat the hell out of Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Tooney is not a tackle, but they had him at left tackle out of necessity. And so their offensive line was banged up. Like, they need to address the offensive line this offseason. But then, okay, if you're going to be big spenders, which they don't have a lot of salary cap space, so you're going to eventually, when you have a franchise quarterback, every organization has seen this. The Steelers saw it with Ben Roethlisberger. You can't pay everyone. And so eventually you start seeing these holes in your roster, and you hope that you can fill it with young talent. But when you look at like the wide receivers that are going to be leaving, who do they have left? Xavier Worthy? Like, that's it. And he's a rookie. He's going to end his second year, but still, I think the Chiefs were vulnerable this year. And I'm going to be honest, with the lack of space they have in terms of salary cap space, and they're drafting 31st, I just think that they're going to remain vulnerable. I agree with you what you said 100%, that as long as you have Patrick Mahomes, you have a shot. But there comes a point where if Patrick Mahomes is thrown to a bunch of nobodies, then does it matter? Because you saw when the precision was off just a little bit, and that's what we saw in the Super Bowl. The pass to Travis Kelce, which everyone's like, I can't believe he dropped it. It wasn't a great throw either. It was low and away, and he couldn't haul it in. Sure, he normally makes that catch, but still, I think this Chiefs team, barring a complete retool where they kind of figure out, okay, are we going to change our philosophy? Are we going to change how we want to do things? It feels like they're on their way down, doesn't it?
It does, especially when you think about the talent in the AFC.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point are they no longer able to hold off Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert? There's a lot of talented quarterbacks in the AFC that have good football teams around them. And Kansas City, by getting the bye this past year, obviously didn't have to play that first round playoff game, didn't have to draw one of those tough teams, but are they going to get the bye next? I mean, I struggle to see Kansas City as the number one overall seed next year. Now you got to go through an even tougher playoff gauntlet. It's going to be very, very hard for them to get back to the Super Bowl.
Because the defense, I mean, you talk about Bolton and Wharton, those are two big names, and you talk about Reed and the deep safety. They're going to
Reed played a great game last night. Great game on Sunday night.
And so it's one of those situations where you look at this, you're like, okay, they're going to have to figure something out. I mean, now in the NFL, you can kick the can down the street, but eventually you got to pick it up. But I don't know if they're at that point yet, but we'll see. I'm not about to say that their chances of winning it are over, but I do think that they are coming back to the field a little bit. In the AFC, it used to be, here's the Chiefs and here's everyone else. And the gap between those two entities was pretty wide. I don't think it's that wide anymore. And I did ask myself in the second half of the game, and I'll ask you what you thought of this. Would this game have been more competitive if it was the Bills?
Yes.
I thought so too. And then I thought, would it have been more competitive if it was the Ravens? And I think absolutely it would have been.
Yes.
That would have been a great rematch to see, because those two teams played in M&T Bank Stadium this year. But all right, well, let's talk to our next topic. The Chiefs failed to three-peat. No one's ever done it in NFL history. The Steelers obviously won back-to-back in the 70s 2 times and failed to get the three-peat. The Patriots were in that position before. Do you think we'll ever see an NFL team win 3 straight Lombardi trophies?
Yeah. You know, I don't want to say never, but boy, it's going to be hard. This is, well, first of all, it's hard in all sports. Like, there hasn't been a three-peat since I think it was the Lakers in like 99 to 2001, something like that, in any of the major sports in
Yeah.
America. So we're looking at a quarter of a century in any major sport without this occurring. And in like baseball, you don't have a salary cap. You could have the most loaded roster imaginable. In the NBA, you need 3 stars,
Right.
and you can get on a dynasty run. It's so much harder in football because of the big roster and the salary cap and the schedule and the way that they do everything there, man. That they make you earn it every single year. And it's such a copycat league. Coaches are so good and so competitive, and they're so quick to be able to figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it well, and then make you adjust. The run that the Chiefs have had is remarkable, man. Absolutely remarkable. 5 Super Bowls in 6 years. I don't know if we'll see that again. I mean, like it just feels to me as though we are entering a stage now with so many good quarterbacks out there and so many good coaches that it could really be competitive every single year in terms of who the favorite is.
I think, you bring up the other sports, and I'm going to say, okay, let's kind of put that to the side, because like you said, there's no comparison between a 53-man roster and then and a salary cap compared to like basketball rosters, et cetera. If you go back into the 70s, so the Steelers had 2 opportunities in the 1970s to try and three-peat. There was no salary cap. Do you think that the 70s dynasty of the Pittsburgh Steelers would have been the dynasty if they had to sign everyone and keep everyone underneath a number? No, you're not keeping all those Hall of Famers on one team. You would have lost them to free agency because there was no free agency either. I think that the Patriots run was amazing. I think the Chiefs run was amazing. But I think when you look at the salary cap and the fact that in the NFL, the number and the price for these elite players just continues to go up. And even though the salary cap goes up as well, you get to the point where, like we just talked about this, you can't bring everyone back. You're going to have players leave because you have to allocate the money in an appropriate way. Look at, for instance, the Cincinnati Bengals are a great example. You pay Joe Burrow a king's ransom, as you should. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase this offseason, as you should. But then where does that leave T. Higgins? Where does that leave some of these other players? Where does that leave their defense? Obviously, the defense was their issue. I don't think we'll ever see a three-peat in the National Football League because of those reasons. The way that it's set up, the system is set up that you can have success where you've been in the Super Bowl for a lot of, you can be there, but to win it, I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's ever going to happen, Coach, if I'm being honest.
No, I won't be shocked. You bring up the 74 or the Steelers of the mid 70s. That 74 draft, Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth, Mike Webster, Donnie Shell comes in as those 5 guys are all in the Hall of Fame. They would all be hitting free agency at the same time, right? Who are you picking? You're not signing all of them.
No, and then that's why you can't compare eras either. I don't think it's fair to do that. Even in the 80s, you didn't have that salary cap free agency, and that was I think the 90s was when that really became prominent, when it became official. We'll put it that way. So we'll see, but I don't think anyone, not just the Chiefs, I don't think anyone's going to three-peat in the NFL. All right, let's go to our 5th topic. What for you will be the biggest story when you reflect on the 2024 NFL season?
Some great storylines this past year.
Absolutely.
Jaden Daniels is a great story. I think the emergence of the Lions, which, we saw that last year, but now the Lions being sort of like a perennial powerhouse is such a change on, you and I for 50 years. Well, you're not that old yet, but for 50 years, for me anyway, the Lions stunk. So now to be talking about them like one of the contenders every year is a great story. But for me, it's the resurgence of the running back market. Running backs were, we had these conversations on this program about a year ago, how the running back market has been so devalued, about how this position group, you can just get anybody and plug them in. And then look what happens. The offseason, all these big names change teams. Saquon Barkley has, an historic year. He set a record if you count the postseason. First guy in the history of the league to rush for over 2,500 yards in a total season, postseason included. Derrick Henry has a monster year in Baltimore. Now you got guys coming out of the draft like Ashton Genty and some really good backs out of Ohio State. It just feels like this is a renewed market, and that the running back has once again become a really valuable piece in the NFL, which I love because I'm a old school football guy at heart, and the running back to me is just like when we were kids, and you were playing down at the ballpark.
Yep.
Everybody claimed that they were a player. Everybody claimed a running back. Nobody was ever like, I'm a wide receiver, because I grew up in the era where wide receivers were soft, so you just, nobody's gonna be a wide receiver, so it's great to see the running back.
Hey, I'm all for that. There are a lot of storylines, and we'll dive into some of these storylines in the month between the end of the season and the start of the new league year and the tampering period. That's March 10th, by the way, when that starts. But I'm always left at the end of every season with the thought of what could have been. The season was great. It's always phenomenal. But what could have been? And when I say like what could have been, I'm referring to little things. Why is the NFL so popular? Because there's so much magnitude every time you play a game. Like, what about in week 18, the Sunday night game, Detroit, Minnesota? Like, what if that game went different? The Detroit Lions, what if they didn't have so many defenders get injured? Aiden Hutchinson breaking his leg, pretty gruesome, by the way. But he wasn't the only defender in Detroit that got hurt. I've always felt like we were setting up, we wanted to see that Detroit, Philadelphia NFC championship game, and we were kind of robbed of that. What could have been? Hell, as a Steeler fan, I'm looking at the Steelers at 10-3. What could have been if they didn't completely crap the bed and lose their final 5 games? I always find myself looking back and say, okay, let's even go to the playoffs, AFC playoffs. What if Lamar Jackson doesn't have one of his worst games of the season in Buffalo, and then you have a Chiefs, Ravens, or you could even go to the Texans, Chiefs. Like, I always look back and say, what could have been? And I think that there's a lot of teams that are probably really kicking themselves right now saying, man, we might have blew our shot. And the Lions got to be at the top of my list. They lost both of their coordinators to head coaching jobs. They're going to lose more players. And while they are going to run it back with a lot of the nucleus, man, what could have been? Like, we'll have to do an entire show, Coach, on what could have been in 2024. But that's always what I think about. What's your take on that?
Well, I feel like I get it totally. And I think about the Steelers season and I say, man, what if they had just stuck with Justin Fields?
Yeah.
Because what they got was an offense that was like boom and then bust with Russell Wilson. Clearly better than the offense that they had with Fields for those first 6 weeks until it wasn't. And I think to myself, what if rather than boom then bust, they had just gone like slow and steady progress, and then rather than be bottoming out when the playoffs arrived, they were actually peaking because they had just kept getting better with the consistency of Fields. But that said, you can't. Life doesn't work like that, obviously.
No, I get it. Totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just every. I used to tell my students this all the time because I taught seniors, and I would say like, hey man, all of your lives are going to change dramatically when you graduate, and you will make decisions that will take you here and not there. And you've got to be okay with that, because you can't live your life thinking about the what if. And that's what makes the NFL and all sports really so compelling. It is so much about decision making and domino effects and the things that you mentioned, like the Hutchinson injury, or one team's decision to go for it on 4th down in that moment affecting that game, which now has a butterfly effect on all the other. It is fascinating when you think of it like that.
Because it's the only league that there is so much emphasis on every single game. Week 1 through 18, they all matter. And so, yeah, you might say, well, that's early in the season, they'll be able to come back. Yeah, they could, but those losses early in the season could end up come back to kill you. In baseball, when you play 162 games, if you come out of the gate slow, you're probably going to be able to make up that ground. Like, it's not going to be the end of the world. So it's a little bit different. But let's finish this up as we always do with the player profile. You want to talk about a guy I'm sure you have an affinity for due to just his changing positions and the 1-year prove it deal that you mentioned earlier, Zach Bond of the Philadelphia Eagles. Go ahead.
Yeah, Zach Bond, man. What a great story, right? I mean, it's a guy that most people didn't know entering this past season. He's third round draft pick by the Saints back in 2020. And he's just pretty much like a special teams guy, role player. Never had more than 30 tackles in a single season in New Orleans. But he's athletic. He played with his hand down. He could stand up. He'd been a guy that you could move all over the field. And, Vic Fangio, implementing his zone system in Philadelphia, likes rangy guys that can run the field and cover. Doesn't, he knew he had a monster defensive front, so he didn't need these downhill pluggers at linebacker. So they go and they sign Bond on a 1-year deal, and the dude has 151 tackles. He's an all-pro, and then has what you pointed to as one of the most pivotal plays in the Super Bowl, and now he's going to go get rich. He just played himself into, whether it's in Philly or somewhere else, a monster contract. He's still a young guy. So I love seeing those stories. I brought up guys like this in the past when we do these profiles. I like seeing the guy who sort of toils in obscurity, who's a pro's pro, just does his job. And then when his opportunity comes, he makes the most of it and now springboards it into something much larger. So I don't know where Zach Bond's going to wind up. He might be a scheme-specific guy where if you get him in the right scheme, he'll continue to flourish. But if you don't, he may disappear. But yeah, good for him, man. He's a Super Bowl champ and he's about to get rich.
I love guys that turn that opportunity into a big payday. He's going to get paid by someone. I think he had some votes for Defensive Player of the Year, actually. And he was an all-pro, like you mentioned. And so I've always thought, hey, he had one chance, a 1-year prove it deal. And if this guy turns it into a multi-year, several $1 million, then guess what? Even if he never pans out anywhere else, even if he's just a 1-year wonder, you had that 1 year, you got yourself a Super Bowl, you had a pivotal role in that victory and the whole season. No one's ever going to take that away from you. And we'll see where he goes. I don't know. This is a great story, but it's a one of the many layers of the Super Bowl that we'll have to sit and kind of digest over the next few weeks before the new league year starts. But Coach, any final thoughts on the 2024 season?
It was a great year. It was a good year for football. Other than the officiating issues, it was pretty much drama-free. Lowest concussion rate this century in football. I mean, they seem to have recovered from some of the PR mess that they got themselves into with the concussion issues. Daniel Snyder, guys like that, moving on from them. Great young faces coming up into now going to be prominent players in the league, the Jaden Daniels and some of the young quarterbacks. I just think it was an exciting year. And, you and I know this well from our job, man, but football never sleeps. So we'll be right back at it in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. Like I said, March 10th is when they try to change the name, but I will always call it the tampering period. The legal tampering period starts on the 10th. The new league year starts on the 12th. And we're going to have you covered. This show never goes away, folks. The NFL Whip Around will be here every single Tuesday morning. But Coach, you can also check out your stuff. I'll let you plug your Call Sheet Daily podcast.
Yeah, Call Sheet Daily podcast. Tuesday's show. It's a show we call The New Normal, and we're going to have pick up a little bit with the conversation we were having here, talking about whether dynasties will be the new normal as you go from the Patriots to the Chiefs to maybe the Eagles next. And then Wednesday's Whiteboard Wednesday, Coach Frank Lasasso and I breaking down Coach Fangio's cover 2 scheme. How's cover 2 work? Why is it so effective? What are the variants of it, et cetera? So got some good stuff coming.
Awesome stuff as always, Coach. Enjoy your content. Enjoy it all this season. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back next week on another NFL Whip Round. Everyone take it easy.